Hey everybody. So for our last module, we are going to be talking about local government in California. And local government is really interesting because it is both a very interesting level of government where regular everyday people actually have the best chance of making an impact on the decisions and actions of local government. So it's this really rich playing field for democratic participation, if you will. But at the same time, it's also our most neglected and overlooked level of government in our overall governmental system, within this larger federal system that we have in the United States. So this is our opportunity to look in a little bit more depth at this, pretty interesting level of government. Okay, so as a starter for understanding the role that local government plays within the larger system. Local governments are often talked about as being the level of government that is closest to the people. And by this we mean, it's the level of government where average, everyday citizens have the best chance of being able to interact with their government and with, local officials, local government decision makers, and being able to influence the decision that those government decision makers make. And it's also true that local governments provide, really critical services that are essential for, making the day-to-day life that we experience, actually possible in this country. Things like police service, public safety, public health, education, decisions about land use, so things like housing, manufacturing, where the various different types of land uses are going to be physically located. Those are all decisions that tend to be made at the local level. Elections within our democratic system are run at the local level. And then official acts and records, the official proceedings of government and record keeping of government that's so crucial for documenting things like births and deaths, marriages, divorces, adoptions, all of those things that are really critical for, things like family law, for instance. These are all things that happen at the local government level. And local governments are really important conduits for democratic participation. Most people who become engaged and involved in government in the United States beyond just elections, but actually become involved in trying to influence the decisions that government officials make. Most folks actually start at the local government level, trying to influence decisions that get made in their communities. So local governments are really an important breeding ground for civic education, for understanding how citizens can become more effective in raising their voices to affect change within government in the United States. Okay, so those are some pretty lofty ideals for what local government can do, how it can function within the larger governmental structure in California and within the United States more broadly. But there are also some issues or difficulties with local government, especially in California. And, the biggest drawback or biggest difficulty with local government would have to be with its complex structure. So local government is incredibly complicated, particularly in California, where we have local governments in California that are a really complex web of overlapping jurisdictions. So most of us, we don't have just one local government that serves all of our needs for our local community. Instead, we are all served by a variety of different local governments. And trying to get a handle on this, perhaps the first or simplest way to start categorizing the different types of local government that we experience would be the difference between what are called general purpose local governments and special purpose local governments. So when we're talking about general purpose local governments, we're talking about things like cities or towns, so things like municipal governments, as well as county governments. So these are local governments that provide a variety of different services to their residents. So they might be dealing with, for instance, having a fire department, having a police department, having a public health agency, having a land use or zoning department, so having a variety of different services that local government offers. So those are distinct from special purpose local governments. So these are local governments that specialize in doing one thing particularly well, or at least that's the ideal, that they would do one thing particularly well. So the most common special purpose local government are school districts. So we're all probably pretty familiar with school districts. So these are special local governments, and their entire job is to provide public education for a local community. But beyond school districts, we have a variety of other different types of special purpose local governments. Things like water districts, being able to provide water to a particular community. Regional governments. So these are governments where for instance, different counties get together to try to provide a problem-solving forum for the region at large. So for issues that spill over across the boundaries of any particular general purpose local governments. So thinking about things like, how do you coordinate public transportation in the Bay Area, for instance? That's going to be something that's going to require some regional approaches that go beyond just, let's say the city of Hayward or Alameda County, for instance. This is going to involve bringing in different local governments from throughout the region to try to come up with an overall coordinated approach to something like public transportation. Additionally, transportation districts. So a district that's made up entirely to solve the transportation needs of a particular local area. And then there are a variety of other different special purpose local governments that exist. Can be an irrigation district, particularly for more rural areas. Can be community college districts. Can be utility districts. So, for instance, an electric power district. You can have a local government that provides your electricity. In California, most of the public is served by PG&E, which is a privately owned but heavily regulated company. But in some areas of California, the electric utility is actually owned and run by a local government. So there are a variety of different local governments that operate within California to provide specialized services. Okay, so looking first at general purpose local governments. The first one that we're going to look at are municipal governments. So these would be governments like the city of Hayward or the city of San Francisco or the city of San Jose. These are local municipalities where a local government is formed, and the services that these municipal governments commonly provide would include things like police protection, fire protection, land use and zoning departments, so making decisions about what types of buildings can be built in which parts of the city and which other types of land use are disallowed in certain areas. So that's hugely important for things like housing, for the siting of different industrial and commercial facilities in the area. So that's certainly a huge area of local government within California. Also things like sanitation, so garbage and recycling, water. So when you open up that tap in the morning and water flows out, where is that water coming from? In most of California, our water services are provided by local municipal governments, although that's not true everywhere. In a large portion of California, we have our water service provided by our municipal governments, as well as sewer service, so treatment of sewage and proper disposal of sewage. All of those services are provided by municipal governments. So within California, there are two types of municipal governments, what are called general law cities and then charter cities. And charter cities are also sometimes called home rule cities. And these are cities that, under the state constitution of California, are allowed to apply for a charter, which means that they can set up their organizing charter or organizing document that establishes their municipal government in a way that provides a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more local decision-making control for the municipal government. In other words, the local municipal government and the citizens who reside there can make decisions about the structure of their municipal government that might differ than how municipal governments are set up in other places in the state. Whereas general law cities, they have to follow the strict structural guidelines that are established by the California state constitution. So generally, the larger cities in California tend to be the charter cities that allow them a little bit more flexibility in terms of how they set up the structure of their municipal government. Okay, so in terms of municipal government structures, there are a variety of ways in which local municipal governments are set up within the state. The first type of structure, which is particularly common in the larger cities, are what are called the strong mayor systems, also sometimes called the mayor-council governments. So these are local municipal governments where there will be a mayor who's generally elected by the entire city. So that mayor represents the city at large, as well as a city council. And generally speaking, in these larger cities, the city council is made up of representatives who represent different wards or different districts within the city or different neighborhoods within the city. So under a strong mayor system, this is very analogous to what we have at the state and federal levels, where the mayor is the chief administrative or executive officer of the city, and the council is the primary legislative body of the city. So much like at the state level, the governor is the chief executive officer and the state legislature is the chief legislative body. In a strong mayor system at the municipal government level, the mayor is the chief administrator and the city council is the chief legislative body. Or, going up to the federal level where the president is the chief executive officer and the Congress is the primary legislative or lawmaking body. So in the strong mayor system, you've got a roughly analogous setup to the way that we have it at the state and national levels, where you've got a mayor who's in charge of administering the city government on a day-to-day basis, whereas the council provides kind of the general steering of the government in terms of the laws, or at the local level they're generally called ordinances, where the local government or city council will pass ordinances and it's up to the mayor to carry those out or execute them on a day-to-day basis. Okay, the strong mayor system contrasts with what's called the weak mayor system, or sometimes called the council manager government. So this is more common in smaller cities, particularly in the suburbs, where you may have an official who's called the mayor, but that mayor tends not to have a lot of powers. Instead, generally speaking, under a weak mayor system, the mayor is just another member of the council who is given the title of mayor. That allows that person to be the presiding officer at city council meetings, but they don't have any real special powers. They still have the same voting power as any other member of the city council, so they are not invested with a lot of administrative power. Instead, the day-to-day operations of government, executing the ordinances or the laws of the city or municipal government, tend to fall upon the city manager. So here's where the manager part of the council manager government comes in. And the city manager is a professional administrator who is hired by the council to basically run the city on a day-to-day basis. And that city manager, has management or administrative responsibilities, but they are answerable to the council on a day-to-day basis. In other words, they keep their job so long as they keep the city council happy. And if the city council is not happy with their performance, the council can fire the city manager and hire a new manager. So in other words, this is a municipal government system where the power mostly resides with the city council that then empowers the city manager to carry out the duties on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so those are the two main types of structure in terms of who has most of the power within municipal government, as well as who administers municipal government on a day-to-day basis. One last structural aspect of municipal government to talk about is how city councilors get elected. So there are two different structures. One is ward-based elections or district or neighborhood-based elections versus at-large elections. So in ward-based elections, each member of the city council represents a different ward or different neighborhood of the city. So that guarantees representation of the different neighborhoods or different areas of the city on the city council. That approach tends to be used most often with larger cities. So the bigger the city, the more diverse a population you have within the city, the more important it is to have ward-based elections to guarantee that different sections of the city still have representation at city council. That contrasts with at-large elections. Those are elections in which the city councilors are elected by the entire city or by the entire municipality. So in other words, the city is not broken down into different wards or neighborhoods. Everybody on the city council is representing the entire city. That tends to work better in smaller cities, particularly in more of the suburban municipal governments in California, where there's not as diverse a population within the municipality. So therefore, it's not as important to make sure that each segment of the city or municipality has distinct representation in city government. The other type of general purpose local government would be county governments. And so we've got 58 counties within the state of California. And county governments generally function as the administrative arm of state government. So they are still local governments, but most of the functions that they serve are to serve state government purposes. So these would be things like public health and safety. So every county in California has a publicly run or county-run public health system, often includes a county hospital. Welfare programs for the state of California tend to be run through the county governments of California. Public records. So anytime there is a property transaction, anytime there's a birth or death or marriage or divorce or adoption, any of these official proceedings that need to be recorded by government, that tends to be done by the counties within California. Our elections are run by our county governments. So, although, for instance, the Secretary of State of California maintains a kind of a clearinghouse website for voter registration information, the actual conduct of our elections is something that is handled on a county-by-county basis within the state. Okay, and then finally we've got special purpose governments. So these are local governments that are established to provide some type of specialized government service. And the most common special purpose government that we see in California, as well as in other states throughout the U.S., would be school districts. So these are special purpose local governments set up specifically to provide education, to provide public education to the people who live within a particular area. And within California, we've got over 1,000 distinct school districts. So, This gets at how localized the delivery of our education government services are within the state, that we've divided up that government role into 1,000 different local school districts. That also, by the way, gets at some of the inequities that we see within our educational system, both in California and in the United States more broadly, where the more you divide up an area into distinct school districts, the more that you're likely to see, for instance, richer school districts and poorer school districts. Districts where you see pretty wide differences in terms of the local tax base that can afford to spend money on local schools. So you have rather dramatic differences in things like teacher salaries, rather dramatic differences in terms of the quality of school buildings from one district to another. So this is certainly part of the story of local government in California and in the US more broadly, is that our education system is highly fragmented into these relatively small school districts. Other types of special purpose governments that we have in California and elsewhere would be natural resources special governments, things like water. Not only the water service, oftentimes called the retail water service. So when you open up your tap in the morning and water comes out, okay, who have you got to pay at the end of the month for that water service? That tends to be what's called a retail water provider, oftentimes is a municipal government, but also how did that retail water provider get that water to provide to your tap? That tends to come from wholesale water districts. So for instance, if you happen to live in Santa Clara County, the water that comes out of your tap ultimately comes from the Santa Clara Valley Water District, which is a wholesale water provider, which contracts for water from things like the State Water Project, that contracts for water, for instance, from snowmelt from the Sierra Nevadas. So water districts are a very important natural resources special purpose government. Fire districts, particularly in wildlands or lands at the interface between where people live and where wildfires tend to occur, are particularly important. Irrigation districts, particularly in the rural areas of the state, to provide irrigation for crops, are really important local special purpose local government, as well as parks districts are another type of natural resource district. And then we've got all sorts of other types of special purpose governments. Pretty much any type of government service you can think of, you can probably find a local special purpose government somewhere in the state that provides that service, whether we're talking about transportation, housing, airports, any type of service that people in a local area have at some point in time gathered together and voted to approve a special local government to be set up to provide services for one particular type of use. So the takeaway point here is that local governments in California provide a host of different opportunities to become involved in government and to affect and shape decisions in our local communities, but it's also this really complex overlapping grid of different local governments that serve us all.